So hi, welcome, Sonya.
Hi.
And hi, Shelley. Welcome to you too.
Yes. Hi, I'm Diane McGarry with Drake Arts. Thank you so much for joining me, co-host Tom McGarry, author Sonya Larson, and ASL interpreter Shelley for Sonya's reading and Q&A. Sonya's short fiction and essays have appeared in such publications as Best American Short Stories, Plowshares, American Short Fiction, American Literary Review, Poets and Writers, Writers Chronicle, Amazon Originals, Audible.com, West Branch, Salamander, Memorious, The Harvard Advocate, and I could go on and on and on. She recently received fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts in 2020, the Bread Loaf Winners Writers Conference, the Vermont Studio Center, Ragdale, the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and St. Bartolo Club Foundation. She is director of Grub Street's Muse and Marketplace Writing Conference and is an organizer for the Boston Writers of Color Group. She received her MFA in fiction from the Program for Writers at Warren Wilson College, and she lives in Somerville, Massachusetts. We're so excited to have you here, Sonya.
Me as well. Thank you so very much, Diane and Tom and Shelley, and to the entire Drake Arts community. I just have to say I have been so pleased, and it has been personally nourishing for me as an artist to partake in everything that Drake has offered thus far over the current year. Some of the interviews we've done before today have just been such a pleasure. And I really mean it when I say I walked away from them feeling so inspired by the work that you do.
Wow.
And I also know, I'm honestly, I told my husband, I was like, God, I want to live there. This is great. And so just thank you for that. And also I'm an arts administrator myself. And I must say, this has been one of the most thorough and well-organized festivals I have ever seen take place. So just absolute thanks to you. And this has just been so much fun already. So I'm very, very pleased to join you today. I am going to give a reading from my work, and I think I'll describe it a bit, and then we'll transition to Q&A if anybody has questions of any kind. But I'll start off by talking a little bit about myself and this story that I'm going to read from. We talked about this a little bit about in an interview that we had earlier this summer, but for those who haven't seen it, I'll just tell you a bit about myself. I'm a writer, and very importantly for my own work, I'm biracial. I'm half Chinese and half Swedish. And the experiences that I've had growing up, seeing the world through both of these lenses, and of course a kind of combined lens of them both, has really been important for the fiction that I write. And I'm going to read today from a story called Gabe Dove, which we discussed a bit back in July, but it's a short story that I began during this strange period in my life that I'm sure a lot of other people have had similar such phases in their life, but it was one in which I found myself single and in my early 30s, and very much wanting to meet someone that I could spend the rest of my life with. And I, over the course of 4 years, went on dates with 140 different people. I know.
A lot.
Yes, it was a lot. And I only know that because I kept a spreadsheet, which sounds callous and horrible. But the reason I did that is because this friend of mine, when I was feeling very discouraged at the outset of this journey, she said, Sonya, dating is a numbers game, and you should just go out with as many people as possible. Don't worry. Don't be too picky, for lack of a better term. Don't think too hard. Just go out with people. And when you come home at the end of each date, take some notes about what you enjoyed about the date or what you didn't enjoy about the date. And the purpose of this is not to evaluate all of your dates, although it sounds like it. The point of it more so is to understand for yourself what's actually important to you. And sometimes the things that you think are important to you actually turn out not to be that important, and vice versa. So I started doing that, and I found myself in these, well, I have many stories, as I'm sure anyone who's been on many dates can tell them. But one big theme that I kept encountering unexpectedly was a lot of comments from men that I was going out with on my race. And I hadn't had that experience in many years. The last time that I was really having those kinds of moments and discussions was back when I was in high school as a waitress and encountering just strangers in the public more regularly. And so oftentimes people I was waiting on would comment on my race, and it was confusing and strange and so on. And here again, in my early 30s, this was happening again, and it made me puzzled. It made me angry. It made me think about how I operate in the world racially. It really made me focus on that a lot. And at the same time, I was reading articles about how there are trends on OkCupid and Tinder and all these dating sites between people in terms of who they select as people they want to date. There are definite trends racially. So all this went into my thinking here, and I just started writing this story called Gabe Dove, and I'll read from it now. I think it will take about 10 minutes. Are there, Ha's right here, are there any questions or any, can you hear me fine?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
All right, excellent. So I'll start right in. Again, this story is called Gabe Dove. I met Gabe Dove when I was sad and attracting men who liked me sad. There was the jeweler with goopy eyes, the lawyer who overtexted, men with lotioned hands, combed beards, tight jeans. Many had allergies. Few ate bread. Inside of 2 coffees, they were chronicling the history of their itchy and unrested bodies. I listened. I was too weak to protest. All of our hearts had recently been destroyed. They thought me gentle, soft, easy on their hearts. Enough of these limp dicks, said Angela, unwrapping a beef sandwich on her desk. Angela was admin like me, 10 years younger, and generally exasperated from repeating her own advice. You've got to meet someone normal, she said, someone from Shelby. Shelby was Angela's neighborhood. Shelby was where my mom played mahjong in a hair salon. Shelby wasn't the kind of place I'd go looking for a man. But these uptown guys, I said, pressing ketchup from my packet, at least they have money. They're snobs, said Angela. She licked a trail of beef juice from her wrist. Look, do you want a good one or not? Or just sleep with someone, why don't you? You've got to break the seal. But I can't stop thinking about him, I said. I can't stop thinking about... Hold up, said Angela, raising her hand. Remember, his name is Mr. Fuckbag. Mr. Fuckbag. I thought, right. Practice saying it, she said. I want you to say it 20 times a day. She put down her sandwich and looked me squarely in the eyes. Fuckbag, fuckbag, fuckbag. I wanted a good one, but I knew that these things don't happen right away. You have to go through some months. You have to go through some people. Some asked about my triathlon stuff. Some did not. A lot were the type who liked Asians. Those googly eyes, too enchanted, too soon. They marveled at my tiny frame, my hairless arms, how they could wrap their fingers all the way around my wrist. They liked me small. I tried swimming in the river. Coach said, stay in the pool, take it easy, don't push. In the river, there was no one, just hunched men in dinghies, lily pads clogging the shores, floating branches to push out of the way. But always there was X. Even with my face in the water, ears plugged up to my brain, X was there. It was for X that I glossed my nails, for X that I curled my hair, for X that I tried on 20 scratchy blouses in the litter of the fitting room. Sometimes in the river, I had the sensation that I was drowning. Ridiculous, I know. I'm an ace. I'm an expert. I was All-State 3 times. But I tell you, I couldn't breathe. Once I had to stop. I was choking. I had to curl myself over a branch like a kid in her very first lesson, the one who still needs plastic floaties, the one nobody wants to be. Angela said she knew him from church. And I guess because Angela and because church, I was expecting a white guy. She thumbed his number into my phone. Gabe Dove, she said. Don't be surprised if he takes a while. He's a doctor. She nodded approvingly. Our texts were brief, all logistics. At home, I watched an episode of Idol, but only half. I put on my orange twisty dress. I did my hair. He'd agreed to come to my neighborhood, to a bar called The Vault. It was a nothing place, a comfortable place. I waited by the hostess stand, pretending to read a cracked plastic menu. I was nervous, I guess because of Angela. I like Angela. She took the time. So in walked these guys in baseball caps, shorts, but each one's going for the bar, not for me. Then the revolving door spins, and with a cold gust of air comes this guy sprinting in a 3-piece suit, pressed pants, shined shoes, all wrong for this bar. He's searching the room, neck stretched, holding the handle of a small suitcase on wheels. Are you? He dipped toward me, extending his hand. You must be Chuntao. Hello. We shook. Were you on a trip? I said, eyeing the suitcase. He said that, if only, people ask him that, but no, he just doesn't want to ruin his back. I nodded at Gabe Dove, and together we rolled to the bar. He was Asian. Did Angela pick him because of that? A thing we have in common. Maybe she had that on her mind. Maybe like that would make us more compatible. But what about the rest of me, Angela? What about all that? I sipped a Bud Light, him Campari on ice. We covered my job doing admin and his ear, nose, and throat. He worked at Veterans, had a Bible group. TV was not his thing. Despite his weird suit, he rested his elbows on the sticky bar, his eyebrows very interested in stuff that I was saying. So, said Gabe Dove, is your name Chinese? I nodded and tapped on the bar. But I'm from here, I said. I'm from Burma, said Gabe Dove. I was 10 when we got out. Right on, I said, and gulped up my beer. I had a feeling there were things I was supposed to know about Burma, but my brain was styrofoam all the way through. Gabe Dove asked if I'd been to China, and I said, nah, and he said, you must. He spread his arms and told of lush green mountains near the Myanmar jungle, excitedly offering a view of my ancestral home. But in truth, I wanted to slap him. I didn't want his reportage. It embarrassed me. So you've also been to Myanmar? I said to move things along. Said Gabe Dove. They're the same country, actually. Burma, Myanmar. Oh yeah, I said. Of course. I squeezed my leg, nails digging in. Stupid, stupid. No, not stupid. His eyebrows reached out to me. The history is so confusing. Lots of people don't know. I lowered my head to the bar. Maybe I'd drunk too much. My heart knocked hurriedly like it was trying to get out. Sorry, I said, pointing at my face. I get the flush. Do you? Said Gabe Dove. So does my cousin. I know it upsets his vestibular. I turned my forehead on the cold railing, my own perfume accosting me. Gabe Dove lowered his voice. Maybe you shouldn't be drinking. No, I breathed. I should. I'd never been with an Asian guy. I don't know. They reminded me of my cousins. Too familiar. Wouldn't Mom like to be here, nodding over her glass, endorsing this scene? And I thought, why not? He's safe. Whatever happens, he can't hurt me much. He doesn't have the power. I yawned fakely. I stretched provocatively. He suggested that we leave. His white line hair part communicated him to be not the adventurous sort, but as we walked into the sprinkling rain, he said, want to go back to your place? My place. I pictured my bed, 3 shoved together couch cushions on the carpet of a bedroom belonging to my colleague's cousin's landlady. no sheets. What about your place? I said. I'm down in Shelby, he said. So I'm in West Dale, I said. Way west. It's just that I hate the bus, he said. Who doesn't? I said, staring at the sidewalk, dampening under our shoes. Not to budge. That was the challenge. I wanted desperately to kiss a man, to remember the dormant powers inside of me, but also to be far from anything that reminded me of my life. So we walked. His suitcase squeaked behind us. I let us shift along in silence, the rain blowing through a triangle of streetlight, pricking my eyelids. Finally, he said, it's not the greatest place. It's sort of embarrassing. I don't care, I said, and we waited for the 64. The home of Gabe Dove was right off the highway, behind the erected wood sound barrier, a squat cube building of schoolyard brick. Here goes nothing, he said, unlocking the second padlock. His apartment was one long hallway, with doorways slinking into low square rooms. 2-burner stove, stacked milk crates for bookshelves. He kept apologizing. Doctor, yes, but there was all that debt and helping out the fam. Gabe Dove gazed into a cabinet of glasses, selecting a crystal-cut tumbler and a scratched jar used for jam. He gave me the nice one, poured us Campari, said cheers, and plopped a hand on my shoulder. It didn't move. I didn't move either. We both let it hang there as if we just made roadkill of a squirrel and didn't know what to do. But I tell you, it was nice. The refrigerator humming at my back, the jittery ceiling fan, and me thinking, I don't have to do anything. I don't even have to speak. I can just keep lowering this red syrup into my mouth. Things will happen. I followed Gabe Dove to his bedroom. He closed the door. He flipped off the lights. Then he removed the whole suit, all at once, belt and pants and tight white underwear, like a fitful toddler, like he couldn't wait to be out of his clothes. He had a tattoo on his chest, curls of writing, indecipherable, faded to blue. His breath was herbal, his mouth hard, gyrating, searching in the dark. Overall, I'd say he was blunt and methodical, his limp hands pausing nowhere, like someone working over me with a mop. When we were having sex, I sort of wished that I wasn't, that maybe this was a mistake. I'm not ready. It would have been better if I just kissed him quickly and gone home before I ended up V-legged and jiggling underneath this person. Where was my dignity? Here was the moment I had dreaded and craved, but it didn't feel like things were happening. It didn't feel like much was being accomplished. Through the rain, through the sound barrier, an 18-wheeler grumbled down the highway, the driver suddenly accelerating, as if seizing a lane or waking from sleep. When it was over, Gabe Dove got me a glass of water. He stroked my hair while I sat on the edge of the bed, sipping. Sorry, he said. That was kind of fast, but I wasn't sorry. I had wanted him to hurry up. I wasn't sure what to make of him holding my waist like this, easing the glass from my hand and lowering it to the nightstand. He thanked me. Thank you, he said, bending to kiss my shoulder. Thank you for being here. For being here, I thought. I didn't know what to say. Do you want to stay? He said, lips resting on my skin. Do I want to stay? I said I didn't have a toothbrush or stuff for my contacts. Stay, he said. In the morning, we can go get donuts down the street. And I am telling you that I stayed on the promise of a maple glazed donut. I told you I was sad. And I'll stop there.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wow.
Really?
I'm struck by, even though you're writing about another character, this feels very personal and very vulnerable.
Thank you. Yeah. In many ways it is. Thank you. Yeah. Well, and it's a good lesson, I think, for fellow writers and fellow artists to not be afraid of the parts in the process where you feel vulnerable, because I certainly did feel that way at moments in writing this story. I'm obviously, here's a woman who has thoughts that I have had or that friends of mine have, even for a fleeting moment. And I believe it was the writer Joy Williams. I could be wrong about that, but I believe it was she who once said that all the ugly thoughts that you may have in the course of the day as a writer, make sure that you write them down. Make sure that you record them before they disappear under the floorboards like a mouse. She said something like that. In other words, it's good as a writer to operate almost in the opposite way that you might as an upstanding person. The goal of art isn't necessarily to simply present yourself or your work as this flawless, perfect, upstanding human being. The goal is quite the opposite. The goal is to capture these little inflections and these strange in-between thoughts and feelings that we have, because we all have them. We're human and we forget them. And this was perhaps the first story I wrote where I refused to, or I was really too broken of a place to have the energy to refuse to smooth over some of the difficulties I was experiencing in my own life, and that I was having conversations about with other people who I knew were having similar difficulties. And I just said, let me write from my pain and let me write from my own confusion and my own questions. And it was scary. It was the first story I put out there into the world where I said, I don't know how people are going to read this. Like, I feel a little uncomfortable reading this. I feel a little more mortified or whatever, but this is what I've got. And it has been a good lesson to see that the response to this story has been so much more compelling and enthusiastic than anything I had written prior to this. This story was selected for Best American Short Stories, and it had received a number of accolades. And I think that's no accident. I think prior to writing this, I was probably trying to be very polished and presentable. And with this story, I was like, I can't be polished and presentable. This is who I am, or not who I am, but this story is less concerned with that. So I know a lot of artists have spoken about this, but that was my experience too.
So we've asked various artists, why is art important? And while you were talking, I kept thinking, I don't remember which artist it was, but one of them said, art helps us realize that we're not alone, that we're like the other people, that different things, that we have these horrible thoughts, but that's different. Everybody has that. So I just kept thinking of that as you were speaking. Sweetie, you had something?
Well, no, I mean, the value, Tom, is really what you're saying also, is that the humanity and the humanness of what you put forward. You're right. If we don't have the exact thoughts that you were articulating, we've had close ones or similar, or know people who've had thoughts like that, or been in situations, even if it's not that exact situation, another situation that's similar enough for us to say, oh my God, I know what this is, and it's really important to, especially right now during a pandemic when everybody's like depressed. Yeah. It's so much more important to share how awful things can be, and these feelings that just kind of rip you and gnarl you up inside, I mean, because if you are not alone in that ripping and gnarling, if there's even one tendril of another person coming into it, then you're not ripped and gnarled anymore. Then you've got a way out and a partner, and you've got community. And the only way through things like this is through community, right? And that's, we don't really think, at least I don't think of when I read a book that I'm joining a community, but in fact, we are. Every time we touch another person's heart, or are touched in our heart by another person, we're part of a community, and we're remembering our humanity.
I completely agree. And I think that it's rare that any person bonds with another over shared awesomeness. I mean, it's usually over shared vulnerability. It's huge, and that's what art does so well. I think is art says, here's my vulnerability, not literally, not necessarily autobiographically, but
Sure. No.
Like here I'm creating a space where I say my vulnerability, or a person's vulnerability, or this character's vulnerability, or these ideas vulnerability can live and not live in shame. They're the subject of this painting or of this piece of music or this movie or whatever it may be. It's the subject, and it deserves attention because it's part of what it means to be human. And when, as another person, you encounter that work of art and feel that you identify with it, or you feel seen, or you feel that sense of recognition, then paradoxically it kind of lifts off that shame, I think. I couldn't agree more. There are a couple lines in this story, actually I think in the section that I read, that came out of conversations I'd had with other people in my life about love and about dating. One of them was the moment when Chuntao says, I've never been with an Asian guy. And she herself is Asian. She says, they remind me of my cousins, too familiar or something. And there's a couple ways I think you can read that. One of which is to say, I think she has some internalized racism and so on. And it's part of the subject of this story that she dismisses this man from the outset because of his Asian identity, which she feels like is almost too close to her. And yet it's also because of this shared experience that they have that she can be more of herself. Paradoxically, you can relax around him. She doesn't have to explain what the Asian flush is. She doesn't have, he gets her. And so she paradoxically can both be herself, and she can both be herself around him. And it's also the same thing that makes her push him away, excuse me. And that came out of a conversation I had with someone who said essentially the same thing. She was like, I already am Asian. I don't want to, she said something like, I already bring that to the table. I don't want to. And it was this quippy, funny thing that she said, but it totally got in my head. And I thought it was really interesting. And I wasn't sure what to think about it. I both felt turned off by it, but I didn't want to judge her too harshly for it. I that was her perspective. And it's an interesting subject for fiction. Another moment in what I read came from it was a moment where Chuntao says, she decides she's going to go ahead and sleep with him because, in her words, he can't hurt me too much. He doesn't have the power, which is to say, I don't care about him that much. So even if he hurts me, or if he leaves me or whatever, I don't care about him enough for him to really hurt me. And that actually came out of a direct conversation I had with someone I know whose heart was just absolutely destroyed by this person in his life. And after that, he literally made the decision, I'm not going to ever let myself be that vulnerable with someone again. And he basically chose his partner after that as with that in mind. And he'll say, this person isn't the love of my life, and I want it that way. And it sounds wild to hear, but actually he's not the first person in my life who I've heard say that. And again, these are the little stories. They're actually very enormous stories for the people living them. But these are the little truths that many people grapple with in our lives. And I think that's what fiction does so well, is it can capture those uncomfortable moments that they're not what you're supposed to think, the mainstream idea is you're supposed to fall madly in love with your partner and that's the love of your life and that's the person you end up with. But the truth is, people have all sorts of different kinds of relationships, and they can work for all sorts of different kinds of reasons that aren't what we're supposed to do. And I think good fiction makes space for that. I'm going on and on, but
No.
That's very interesting.
What you're saying is really important. And actually, it's funny because I've seen a lot of articles recently written about relationships and falling in love and what does it mean and which relationships last longer. The I saw her on a crowded subway and then that was it, across the crowded room and that was it, or is it more of a deliberate, slowly getting to know and build knowing into loving with someone? And there's so many dynamics of relationships. It's the human element, right? It's really what is most valuable to us. And if we don't talk about and analyze and accept all the different ways we love and cherish people or don't, then we're selling ourselves short somehow, because we are the only species. We're the only ones on this earth. Trees don't love each other, even though they send out tendrils to help other trees grow. Dogs, once you're dead, they just forget about you. My chickens, I lose a chicken, the flock goes on. They don't even recognize that there's a dead chicken there, except in case there's bugs on it to eat. I mean, that sounds disgusting, but we are the only ones that have these rituals and really strong bonds from our heart centers, really. And it's so important to recognize that and to honor it. And that's what gets us across these boundaries, right? These racial boundaries, these even religious boundaries and political boundaries, is recognizing each other and their humanness.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I will die on that hill. I really, really, I think it's so important for characters to be very imperfect people and very flawed people, and to really, I'm very suspicious of fiction that tries to, I think, moralize or make the subject of the story be like, is this person a good person or a bad person? I mean, we're all the things, and I think the last thing someone should feel is like deep shame for the way their relationship is different than someone else's, or whatever it may be. So those are a lot of the ideas that went to the story, and I do think that's why more people have liked it than some of my other stories. That just weren't as bold, they weren't as willing to put some of that stuff on the page, which is to say I wasn't as willing to put it on the page. So yes.
That's interesting, because I've also noticed a few times you brought up shame, right? And we have the things that separate us or keep us apart are hate, envy, and shame. But of those three, this one is the one that you've highlighted. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
That's such a good question. I mean, I think shame is a big part of my life and my family's life. What were the ones you mentioned? You mentioned envy, shame, and what was the third one? Hate. Yeah. I'm not I don't feel terribly familiar with hate, and I don't feel terribly familiar with envy, but shame is something I am familiar with, and is a big theme, I'd say, in the history of my family. My father's father was an alcoholic. I never knew him. He died when I was very little, but I know that my own father spent his whole life essentially grappling with the fallout of that, and in healthy ways. Like he's been an absolute devotee of Al-Anon, which is in case people don't know, it's like Alcoholics Anonymous, but for the loved ones of. I see you give a thumbs up. Yeah,
yes, my mother was an alcoholic, and Al-Anon actually, in a lot of ways, saved my family's life, because I went when my children were younger, and I thought, since I didn't drink, that I was okay, not realizing that alcoholism is a disease of behaviors as well as drinking, and that I'd inherited a lot of behaviors. It took me a long time And I'm going to humbly tell you, it took me a long time of crying and on my knees and saying, I am messing this most beautiful time of my life up, and I can't figure out why. And then I was led to Al-Anon, and really the steps and the traditions and even the principles, which not everybody likes to do, they all had a lot of value. And the mottos, there's nothing, the program is very, very, very important. And it also relies on community, right? Because the group holds each other, and you're accountable to yourself, to the higher power, whatever you call that, and to the group, right? Because you support each other. Actually, we have a cousin who did not believe in a higher power. So what she said was, the higher power is the group. That's what's my higher power, because she was not spiritually oriented at all. I happen to be very spiritually oriented, but I know a lot of people aren't, and they might shy away from AA or Al-Anon or NA. But these programs, one of the people actually in Al-Anon was saying that her son was an addict, and the rehab place told her that if he didn't stay in NA, he wasn't going to make it.
Wow.
I think it's really telling.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important that people know that.
Yeah.
And it's not, it's a program when nobody's better than each other. They all, we've all been in these trenches, and we know them. We know these trenches.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Diane. I feel in some ways as if I'm talking to my father right now when I'm talking to you. I mean, the story you just told exactly is my father's story. I mean, if he were here right now, he would say much more eloquently than I am right now, just how much he felt himself in the trenches. And he was also confused. This is when I was just a baby, where he felt suicidal. He was really struggling, and he was very confused because, like you, he didn't drink. He's never had any alcohol in his life.
Right.
So he said, how is this possible? And he found Al-Anon and has never looked back. He has gone to Al-Anon meetings twice a week for 35 years. And it is like a religion for him. And it has meant so much to him. And he says outright, this program has saved me and continues to save me every day, and is such a source of wisdom and guidance. And I have such admiration for anyone who is struggling with addiction, and who is putting in this daily work required to reorient a way of thinking, a set of behaviors. It is so amazing to me. It's incredible to me. And I don't think people give people enough credit for who are struggling with this, because it's an enormous feat. And that's also true of the people who love those people. And because it can, as my dad would say, it's not something that affects just the person struggling with addiction. It affects their loved ones. And it's the same pattern of thinking that can very easily be incorporated into those people who surround that person. And so I spent my whole life talking about Al-Anon with my father and talking about the nature of addiction. And I have loved people who have struggled with addiction themselves. And it's something that I'm very fascinated by, not so much the substance stuff. I don't actually think that that's what's very important. It's this way of thinking that is very hard to reorient yourself, but essential. My father said, the buck stops with me. He said, I'm going to do my damnedest to make sure that you, Sonya, don't struggle with this, that it stops with me, which I think is an incredible feat for any person, especially a parent, to take on. I think that's huge. And, was he successful in all ways? I don't know. He's not perfect, but neither am I. And where this all comes down, I haven't struggled with addiction in my own life, but I've watched my father go through this process, and I really, really admire him. And you asked about shame, and I think everyone struggling with addiction has their own different and distinct story to tell. But I think at least the way my father has experienced being the child of an alcoholic, and the way he talks about his own journey has been all that whole story circles around a sense of shame for him, a sense that he wasn't good enough, essentially, on some level, and wasn't in his own right, as he stands here today, no changes made, that he's a lovely, perfect, like just a wonderful human with full stop, and I think a lot of people struggle with that sense that they're not good enough, or they have reasons to be ashamed in the world of who they are, and so that's been very central in his life, and I feel like I just have an intuitive understanding of that as well. And I think in people I've loved who've struggled with addiction, the way I have tended to think about it is they see love as something that exists outside of them, like something that they have to go get. They have to earn it, or they have to demand it, or in other words, it doesn't already exist inside of them.
Sure.
It's something almost like a food that you have to keep getting. And that's how some addictive processes can start. It's a process of reaching outside of yourself for something instead of reaching within yourself for something, to be nourished. And so it's a long-winded answer to your question, but yeah, shame. I know something of shame. I've certainly felt ashamed in my life. I've had people try to shame me, tell me that I'm a horrible person in XYZ way. And that really cuts to my core, because I think I'm already predisposed to feel shame. At the same time, and this is part of the project of my fiction, is I want to say, like, what is there to be ashamed of? Exactly. Like I'm not a perfect person, and neither is anyone I know. And I believe that I am worthy to be loved.
Sure you are.
All, and I try to, we're getting very existential here, but like,
well, we're also talking about generational trauma.
Mm-hmm.
That's really what we're talking about, because my mother wasn't an alcoholic in isolation.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Half of her father's family were alcoholics, and half of the generation before were alcoholics. So it's something that gets passed down. So how do you stop it? Like your father says, he wants to stop it, and I sure as heck wanted to do too. I didn't want to pass on this trait, this weakness, this way of dealing with stress to my children. And by not drinking, I eliminated part of it, but not all of it. Like I said, there were behaviors in there. But the other thing is that your father, like me, gave you, like I gave my children, the most important lesson, which is we can change no matter how old we are. We are not stuck in a particular place. Unless we choose that, we can change no matter how old we are, no matter where we live, no matter how rich or poor we are. And that's a phenomenal lesson.
Yeah. Yes. That's beautiful. It's true. I know. I sometimes think people change. It's inevitable that people change. People change.
Sure.
It's the question. And I think Alice Walker once said that that's the real question of literature is, can people change? That every book comes down to that question. It's like, can this person change? And it's a really good question. And in some ways, the shadow question to that is, can you be the director of your own change? Can you change in ways that you choose to change? But I think my father, like I said, I don't think he's gone through this perfectly through this process perfectly, but I think he managed to say the buck does stop here. He absolutely has done that. And that's an enormous gift that he's given his children, probably in ways that we don't even realize. I don't even think we know all of the ways that we could have led a different life had my father not put in that effort. So I think that's incredible. And yes, I do think people can change. It's really hard. It's really
Hey,
hard.
living isn't easy. What if my mother would tell me as she grew up, that living is not for the faint of heart, and neither is growing old. It's not for the faint of heart, because we have these challenges. Yes. And in certain ways you present characters that are living through those challenges and are voicing the different sides of those challenges. And through the characters in your writing, people can almost not just realize, oh, wow, I'm not alone, but also can decide, gee, I don't want to be like that. I'd rather be this way. You know, when you articulate something, when you get it outside of yourself, when you put it out there and you see it outside, sometimes that's what you need in order to make the judgment of which way you want to go and how you want to walk and be.
Yeah.
And that's a real gift.
No, thank you. And this is making me think again, not to make it all about me or whatever, but this
is all about you. This is
all right, whatever. But this conversation is like the more interesting part. But I will say that the ending of this story speaks to what you're talking about, which is this. I sort of read from the beginning. You have a sense of where Chuntao is in her life. She works admin at this company and doesn't have a whole lot going on, but that's fine. You know, she's living her life, whatever, and going on this dating journey. And at the end of this story, I won't give too much away about what happens, but I hope some pretty surprising things happen at the story's climax. And then the story jumps ahead 10 years. And I did, for just the last page or so of the story, it takes place in 10 years into the future. And I did that for a very specific reason, which was, to your point, Diane, to show the ways in which 10 years later, Chuntao has both changed and not. And so we, as readers, I think you can very quickly see that in 99% of the elements of Chuntao's life, it has not changed. She's still working the exact same job, the exact same place, the exact same town. She's stuck in a way. And I find that interesting and kind of a little tragic, actually. Like she's still doing her thing. And so as a reader, you can start to think like, oh, this is really sad. Like this woman was on this dating journey and it hasn't panned out for her, and she's still stuck in the same place in life. Her own blind spots have really kept her from moving forward or having ambition of any kind pan out, etc. But without really describing exactly what happens, there is an element at the end that makes you, I hope, as a reader, realize, but in a very crucial way, she has changed. And that has to do with what she understands racially about herself and the way she sees people. And I don't even think that she could articulate it very well. But I hope that readers can see it and they understand that. And that the thing that has made her be able to see where she once could not was this brief relationship with this man 10 years prior. And so again, like, I hope the story is saying, or what I intended for the story to say, is people can change. They absolutely can. They may not change very dramatically, or maybe not in very overt, obvious ways, but in this small way, especially for someone like Chuntao, it's a huge deal. It's a huge deal for her to go from saying, I don't want to date an Asian American man for XYZ reason, to suddenly, in the end, she kind of is like defending him and is concerned about him or some part of his story in a way that she absolutely wasn't 10 years prior. So yes, change. I like the meaty discussions that we get into.
I know.
It's so fun. This is what I mean, is I walk away feeling inspired. It makes me want to go write, because just, we cut through all the BS. It's really nice. Anyway.
must be a very good writing coach too, because of the insights you bring.
Thank you. I hope. I don't know. I don't know if I am, but I hope so. It is very fun to me, in some ways, this is the entire point of art, is this conversation that we're having right now, is that you get, in the way that you were talking about earlier, art brings people together. And I don't mean that in some hokey, shallow way. It truly brings people together in that it prompts conversation about really important, really interesting ideas that wouldn't have happened otherwise. Like I would not have met you, all three of you, Shelley, Diane, and Tom, and whoever else might be listening to this right now, were it not for art. Like that just wouldn't, and never mind my art, just anybody's art. Like we're all here because we care about this beautiful thing. And art has a way of cutting through the bullshit too. It has a way of saying, let's talk about these really meaty subjects that they don't have necessarily straightforward answers, and that force you to really self-reflect and ask yourself what you really think, or just make you aware of different possibilities and different I don't know. I just love it.
Yeah, well, it's not all fairy tales time, right?
No.
Sometimes it is. Oh goodness, we lost
Shelley. She's probably on her way back.
Here she is. We lost you for a minute, Shelley.
Oh, no.
Yes, you're back. Good. Thank you.
So Sonya,
Yes.
are you working on any future projects that you want to talk about?
Yes, I am working on a novel tentatively called Code W, which I know that we discussed earlier this summer as well, but it's a novel about park rangers, because I am really into park rangers. And it's like a strange, someone once said to me, they're like, why are you into park rangers? They're like the mailmen of like the national parks. They're just this like very pedestrian, like working.
People take them for granted and they do so much.
That's exactly it. That's why I'm interested in them, is they're easily dismissible, like the mailman, but they know all, they see all, there's like, you talk to any park ranger, as I've had the honor of doing research for this novel, and they're full of fascinating and harrowing stories. And so we mentioned this a little bit this summer, but I'll just give a brief overview of it. But basically, I went on the original inspiration for the story is I went on a trip several years ago with my twin brother to Glacier National Park. We went on this hiking trail. This big storm came upon us unexpectedly, and we almost died. And I was very scared, obviously, but we thankfully didn't die, although I really feel like we came close to some pretty big dangers. And so we were fine, but we did encounter a couple on the trail who was behind us, and knowing that we had just barely made it out safely, we immediately became worried that they were not safe. We went to a park ranger to tell them. The rain was pouring down. It was bitterly cold. It was nighttime. It was really scary. And we knocked on the door of the ranger station, and we said, there's this couple out there. You need to help them. They're in danger. And the park ranger was like, great, bye. And we were like, what? And he said, we were like, what are you going to do with this information? And he said, I'm going to write it down in my log. And I was amazed. I was absolutely amazed. But then he went on to explain to us, and I know we all talked about this at the last time we spoke, but he said, this is why we post signs up everywhere saying danger, danger, danger. This is why we give lectures on why you have to be prepared when you go out in nature, because nature doesn't care about you. It's your job to be prepared, not nature's job not to have a storm. And he was absolutely right. And he said, if it's dangerous for you out there, it's dangerous for us. And only under very particular circumstances will we go search for someone, and this isn't one of those circumstances. And so I was amazed. And I should say, we saw the couple a couple days later, they're safe, but it made me it was a paradigm shift for me. It made me think about the safety net that I assume for myself, not only in nature, but in life at large. I think my whole life have walked around with this notion that if I was really, really in trouble, someone would come to help me. That, I think I've always thought that, and that's privilege right there. That's like the definition of privilege, is I'm not really in danger. Like, my fellow man is gonna help me. And here was a person saying explicitly, no, I'm not gonna help you. Like, you're on your own. Not only are you on your own, but you should have known going into this that you're on your own. And so it totally woke me up. And, as I was saying at the beginning of this session, I write about race a lot, and I think a lot about how the racial experience that I've had or others have dovetail with other ideas in our life, whether it's sex and dating, like in the story I read, whether it's I write a lot about the white savior narrative and who gets to be at the center of their stories. And so it dovetails right there with how we tell stories, and how we form narratives. And then in this case, how I'm imagining it is how in terms of how racial experience dovetails with how safe we presume ourselves to be, and specifically how much we assume other people are going to help us. So I don't know where all this is going. I'm still working on this, and anyone who's a writer and artist who's like me at any rate knows that it's all a hot mess until it isn't. I just feel like I feel totally in the wilderness myself as I'm writing this, but I'm old enough now that I know that that's just part of the process, and I shouldn't freak out too much, because that you just have to get lost for a long time and not know what you're doing.
Well, it also sounds like there might be more than one book in this too.
Oh my God, right? You are not the first person to tell me that.
A lot of different ones. So I'm really, really looking forward to that. And I've so much enjoyed speaking with you, Sonya. It's been delightful. Thank you so much. And thank you all for attending our September arts event. Shortly, we will have our art gallery. It will open again. And also at 4 o'clock, composer and guitarist Thatcher Harrison will perform. I want to take a moment to, whoops, that was the wrong one. I wanted to take a moment to thank our donors. If I put up the right sign here, excuse me for putting the right one up. Where are we? Here we go. Marianne Dornice Goldman, Lois Welber, Blue Shutter Web Design, Anonymous, Diane Song. And we're also partially funded by programs through the Massachusetts Cultural Council. The cultural, I'm sorry, I'm trying to look at everything at the same time as seeing it here. The Billerica, Dracut, and North Andover and Tewksbury Cultural Councils, and the Cultural Improvement Project. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This has been delightful.
Yes.
Totally has. Let's please keep in touch, because I've had the best time talking with you all. Thank you so much. And thank you for putting together this wonderful event. And I hope that this afternoon's event goes wonderfully too.
Thank you, Sonya, so much.
And Shelley, thank you too.
All right.
Oh yes, Shelley. Yay!
Thank you.
Thanks,
I
Shelley.
enjoyed it as well. Thank you.
All right. All right. Bye, Tom. Bye, Dan.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye, Shelley.